Hey, I'm Thomas Chapman. I'm the founder of LandArch Tools, and today I'm going to show you how to install and use LandArchGrade, a new grading plugin that I've developed for Rhino. So to start, we're going to have to download the plugin. So to do that, we can go and type in package manager. And then if we just go LandArchGrade, you'll see it's right there. I've already got LandArchGrade installed, but if you haven't already, you can click install. And once that is installed, you'll have to just restart Rhino. So once you're back in here, you won't really see anything different. But if we type LAG, the LandArchGrade window will pop up for you. So once the UI pops up, you'll see there's an array of different icons here. These are your terrain objects. These all serve sort of different purposes when you're grading a landscape. And the most simple version of these, all the way on the left, is the spot height. You might be familiar with spot heights in surveys. These serve a very similar purpose when grading. So if we click on this, a command will come up and it will say pick a spot height. So if we just click in the document, let's say we'll put it there, you can see a point has been added to the document. You can see in the object list here, it has added a spot height. We can call it RL01. And you can see in the document it's been tagged as that. And because it's been selected, it actually brings us to the property panel over here. We can get to that property panel by either double clicking or clicking on this button here of the object. And this is a UI that exists for all the terrain objects. They're all different depending on what the terrain object is doing. So here, what we can see is that we have this UI. It has the Z, Y, and X, although generally you'll probably only be dealing with the Z. If we click and drag, we can bring that Z value up, and you can see it's reflected in the model. And if we click and drag it to the left, we can bring it down as well. This is a idea in the UI that is reflected in all the terrain objects, is this idea that you should always be able to click and drag to manipulate the terrain. Of course, that's always only really good for roughing in a terrain, and sometimes you need precision. So you can always just click on the numbers and type in a value that you want. You can see that even though we have put in a point, there is no terrain. Well, LandArchGrade uses something called a triangulated irregular network. If you're done surveys and things, you might have got these in the past, where it's basically a mesh that's triangulated, right? So for a triangle, we need a minimum of 3 points in space. So let's go ahead and add 2 more points in space, and you can see we've created our first triangle. So this is the fundamental building block of terrains in LandArchGrade. So you can see what's come up is we have a grade here and a angry red triangle. So one of the fundamental ideas of LandArchGrade is that everything should be visual. So grading should be visual. You shouldn't have to calculate anything. So red here is telling us flat is bad. So if we bring this up 1 notch, 10 mil, you can see we now got a 1 in 70. For me, that's an acceptable grade to get water off a paved area, so I have that set as green. If we bring it down a little bit to 1 in 88, that's, to me, still fairly acceptable, but it's getting up there in the too flat zone of things. And additionally, like if you go up too steep to 1 and 12, that's too steep, and etc. etc. These settings are actually all user customizable. So if you go into settings and then into grade ranges, you can actually just drag these to whatever range that you need them to be. I grade in ratios coming from Australia and the UK, but I know a lot of places uses percentages, which you can just toggle in the settings in the general here. So now that we have our first terrain, let's get this happy again. What should we make it? 1 and 70. Let's keep it 1 and 70. So we can see we have a happy terrain here. But it's pretty boring. So let's add in another one. So we can see we now have 2 triangles. And if we keep adding more and more spot heights, you can see that we instantly get terrain feedback. So one of the biggest things I've worked on with LandArchGrade is to make it extremely fast. So there's no having to sit and recalculate the terrain, it's all real time. So you can see when you move an object, it is instant. And this is a real core philosophy for how I feel terrain design should be done, right? You shouldn't have to try and calculate things, you can just click on this and then nudge it into the right place until all the triangles go green. Or if they don't go green, you're gonna have to try and nudge them in the right direction, right? So this is the core of how terrain generation works, but obviously there's more complexity associated with this. So let's get rid of the sort of intermediate spot heights, so that we have just a nice terrain here, like that. What I'm going to introduce now is called break lines. So spot heights and break lines are sort of the fundamental tools of surveying, right? And we're sort of co-opting them as a method of designing terrain. So what a break line does is it's essentially the same as a spot height, except it's chained together, right? So when we add that break line to the document, you can see it's a line. And when we add it, you can see that it has broken up this mesh into this break line. What is really nice, and I'm going to get a little bit nerdy because I'm quite proud of this one. I worked quite hard to get this right. What I'm doing here is actually called a constrained Delaunay triangulation. And what that means is when you add a break line to this mesh, you're not just adding additional sort of chained spot heights. What you're doing is you're asking the mesh to triangulate their edges on that break line. So what that means is you get a really, really clean mesh when you add these break lines, and it means you can define edges really, really nicely. So the other thing that I think is really, really nice in LandArchGrade is anything that is sectional or able to be sectioned, like a curve, say, comes with this sectional view. So you can see when we click on the curve, it's automatically brought up in the properties panel. We can also get there by just clicking here, and you can see when we hover over the spot heights, you can't see it too well, but the curve highlights, we can just double click into it, and we have this sectional view. What this allows us to do for the first time, really, I don't think it's ever really been done. I'm quite proud of this UI. What it lets you do is you can click on a node in the spot height and drag it up. And you can see while we drag it, you can see the live grade between that node and the next node. So if we wanted the 1 and 62, we drag that up and that drags that node in that curve. What we can also do is we can drag the entire section up as well, and that drags the 2 nodes up at the same time, right? What's really cool though is we can go, okay, I want that to be a 1 and 30, I want that to be 1 and 60. And you can see that instant reflected in the UI, reflected in the document as well. But you can see it always grades left to right. What we can actually do is I have notations where you can go 30 greater than, and that then reverses it, grading right to left. And similarly, you can go 30 less than to grade it the other way, but it just defaults left to right. So this is a UI that exists in everything. I'm going to go through the more detailed parts of it, and I think they'll start to make a little bit more sense as we go down the track of complexity. But just to note down here, if you want to grade the whole thing as one grade, say 1 and 40, you can just set that and it will set the whole curve as that as well. And that notation of doing left to right works here as well. Just less than and greater than arrows on your keyboard. So what will make more sense down the road is we have these options here for display. So sometimes curves can get very complex and you just want to know, or you just want to visualize the end and the start. This is just another way to basically grade the whole thing as one line. But as we get more complex, we have this concept of keynodes. So when you've got a node highlighted, you can press this key, and what that does is it changes the icon of this keynode here, and you can see in the document it actually adds this little diamond icon. And you can notice that the node on the left has actually gone gray, and the nodes at the end and the start have remained editable. What this means is that if you have a curve with a lot of nodes on them, and you just want to grade from the end to a key node rather than having to, push up each node individually, you can promote nodes to be key nodes. So when you drag this up, you can see that we're treating that node as sort of the key, right? And we can just push that into what it needs to be. That will make more sense when we get to it, basically. Additionally, you can delete a node there and it will update. If we, on the reverse side, if you want to insert a node, there's a button up here. We can just click that. We can select our curve and we can insert a new curve into that break line. These are pretty much universal across all curve-based terrain objects. The last thing I want to note is that all objects can have labels and can have sources. Sources are essentially a way to group the source of a terrain object. So sometimes you'll have spot heights coming from an architect, right? So we can label this as an architect sourced spot height, and it just groups them under this heading here. So it's just a way to organize things. And one last thing, all objects can be fixed. So when you click fixed, it deselected it in Rhino. That's why the screen went back to the objects panel. But fixed is essentially in Rhino just making it a locked object. We handle it in pretty much the same way. You can fix it, unfix it, And what this just means is that you can't select it or edit it anymore. This is really good for spot heights or break lines or anything really that you know can't be changed anymore. So if you have constrained conditions, like say the spot height to a door, you can just fix those, and those can never change. So there's a good workflow to keep in mind when designing a terrain. So that's spot heights and break lines. That's really the fundamental building block of how LandArchGrade works. All the other terrain objects are sort of remixes of the break line, essentially. So everything that you see in those UIs, you're really going to see repeated in different fashions in the other terrain objects. And I'll just briefly go through each one just to show you what it does and what you can do with it. So the next object is a pad. So if we go here, we can click here. And this is essentially a break line, but it is closed, right? So this has some interesting quirks to it in that when you move the end nodes up and down, they're actually connected together. So if you move this node or this node, you're actually moving the same node, right? Because it's a closed curve. So it's just useful to know. So this is essentially a break line, but it just has that quirk to it that you can create a closed area. These are generally used for building foundations or sort of platforms that you need a closed loop for. If we go and add a hole, so a hole is a pad, but its behavior is that it actually cuts out the terrain. So anything inside the terrain is cut out. Exact same UI as the pad, but yeah, that's the behavior there. This might become useful if you need to cut out a portion of where the building exists. You might have to move these to the right height, and you don't want any terrain underneath the building, so you would use a hole. A boundary, so boundaries, a boundary. Basically, it is a pad, except its behavior is that anything outside the boundary won't be included into the terrain calculation. So it's an inward thing. Exact same UI as the pad, as you can see, but it just has that behavior associated with it. The other thing is that you can only ever have one boundary in a project at a time, so do keep that in mind. What I will quickly show here is that there is a zoom function within the section views. And this is mainly because when the curves get very complex, it can get quite overwhelming. So the default behavior is for it to start zoomed in once your curves start getting a little bit more complex. So once we delete that, we can go into the path. So this is where they start getting a little bit more interesting. A path is a break line, but it obviously represents a path. You can see actually we're a little bit too zoomed in, and this is where generally you realize you're not working at scale. So if I just go 5 meters, 5 meters, and you can see when you add in a break line and you type in a number, you actually can define how long that thing is. So the path is a really cool object. I've done a lot of work with this to be ultra robust. So one of the interesting things when developing something like this is you have to let the user be able to do the weirdest stuff. So there's a lot of work that's gone into this to make it very robust, that no matter the weird geometry that the user puts in as a curve, the geometry can always build a nice path from it. So this is when the UI starts getting a little bit more interesting. So if we add in some spot height around here so we can see, we have this thing called a verge, and what this does is that in some places, specifically Australia, sometimes you're required to do a perpendicular flat verge when you're doing paths. And this is basically what it's doing. It's just pushing break lines to either side, and you can define the offset, basically, of what that is. So if we scroll down, we can see we finally have some additional interesting UI. So the path tool is really meant to model just normal paths or roads. So either you can have it flat and you can actually change the dimension. If we go down here, you can drag the path width and the path what is that? The path width, and that's the path depth, sorry. You can also click on these to define a specific dimension as well. Additionally, paths can have crossfalls. This has always been a pain for me in my career doing crossfalls, so now you can just click and drag and add the percent crossfall that you want. Or you can have a camber, and this just models a camber. You can drag that camber up, and that models it to the model here, if you can see it. Yes, just options for those for that object type. Now, for terrain objects that have meshes like this, you do have this extra option down the bottom to bake it. This is just if you want to have that object in your model. It's good if you need something solid to reference to. So moving on, let's get rid of the path and let's have a look at walls. So walls are similar. When you add a wall in, if I can zoom, when you add a wall in, the default behavior is that the wall has a flush terrain to the top of wall. And when you add a wall in, the curve acts as the front of the bottom of the wall. There's a lot of options for walls because they can be quite complex for the number of things you want to do with walls. So if this is not retaining the right direction, you can click flip and it will retain the other direction. You can turn off the 3D for all the terrain objects that have meshes. You can turn off the mesh representation of it, basically. The other thing you can do is if you don't want the curve to represent the bottom of the wall and you want it to represent the top of the wall, you just click it, and now that curve has become the top of the wall. When you click it off, it becomes the bottom of the wall. So not all walls are going to be flush. So if you unclick this, you can see we've gained a third line. This represents your retained height. So I think this is really cool. You can now, if we can find, yep, so we're over here. If I can find a good view of it. We can now grade that terrain individually from the top of wall, if you can see that, which I think is pretty neato. So we can bring that all the way down to the bottom, we can bring that down to the bottom, so it's a flush thing, and then it comes out of the ground like that, which gives you a pretty good level of control over your terrain modeling. So moving on. Let's look at the stairs now. Stairs are pretty cool. What they let you do is add a single line to the terrain. At the moment it is flat, so it's not generating any stairs, but if we go 3 meters, you can see we've automatically generated some stairs here and the terrain sticks to it perfectly. We can adjust the width of the stairs. As you can see, everything is draggable. but you can always click and enter a width for yourself as well. This also carries a verge, so if we wanted a verge of 0.5 meters, that works as well. In the section view here, we can get an idea of each step's elevation just by hovering over it. We can drag the stair down and you can see a live sectional view of it. When you let go, it updates into the document. We have another sectional view here, which is just on the step size, right? So you can change the step width and the step tread. Step tread and step riser, that's it. What's really cool is that you can optimize the step height. This will do its best basically to generate a appropriate step given whatever settings you've got. So if we go into stair compliance, you can set your preference for your step height and tread. I know every landscape architect has their own preference. These are mine and the default, but you can set them to whatever you want them to be. But you can see that they're still angry and red. And this is because actually we are doing our best given the length and the height that we've defined for this stair using this curve, right? So it's not always going to be able to come up with a good stair. If you have more flexibility with the length of the stairs, you can hit optimize all. And so you can see what that's done is it's actually brought the curve in so that your step and tread are the right height, given what you've put in. So that's a really neat way to find quickly your appropriate step height. So let's move on. We're nearly done. The last proper terrain object is a ramp. So ramp is the same as the stairs, essentially, a little bit like a path, except what you gain with using a ramp is disabled access compliance. So at the moment I have mine set to Australia. You can set it to UK, US, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. You can set the default to whatever you want it to be in settings. So whenever you create a ramp, it'll always be that setting instead of just Australia. Australia is just the default because I'm Australian myself. So what's really nice about this is it will tell you exactly what's wrong with it. So at the moment, the run is too long. So if we brought this down, we can see it's compliant, although it's flat, so of course it's compliant. If we bring this up to like 1 in 30, we can have a look and it's still compliant. If we bring it up, and suddenly 1 in 12, oops, that's not compliant anymore. So this is a really interesting way to quickly get into compliance. I know in Australia especially, compliance is really, really complicated. The way the rules are written are not super straightforward. You do get a bunch of warnings here. So in Australia, for example, all ramps require TGSI, the little blind tactile pavers that you sometimes see in cities. It's also saying we need landings. So if we click landings, we can get our landings in. And it's also saying we need curbs. So if we add curbs, you can see the curbs get added into the model as well. What's nice is if we scroll down, you can see we have this very similar UI as we had before. We have our landings, which we can change the width of. And here we have a nice sectional view of the short section. So we can change the height of the curbs, we can change the width of the ramp and the depth of the ramp as well. We can also flip the direction of the crossfall as well, which is nice. So that is a quick overview of all the terrain objects in LandArchGrade. I'm sure there'll be many more coming in the future. But I think with that, it gives you a really good basis to grade pretty much anything in a landscape project. Now, you may have noticed that we have a promote curve button all the way at the back here. What this does, and if you click it, you can see it comes up with a bunch of different objects. What it does is it promotes any curve into a terrain object. So you might have noticed when we were doing the brake line that although very nice, very inorganic. And that's not always what you want for landscape architecture. Sometimes you need organic shapes. So you may be using the, what is this called? Control point curve, okay. You may want a brake line that is organic. And just using this, you can't achieve that. But if we go into promote curve and we click brake line, it'll ask you what tolerance you want for the simplification, because we still have to bring it into a line that is interpretable by a triangulated irregular network, right? We're going to be happy with the defaults here, and we're just going to hit enter. And so what this does, and you can see the complexity of the terrain has already increased exponentially, but what we've got is a really nice smooth brake line. So this is when things start to get a little bit more complicated and you have to use the tools to cope with that complexity. So one of the things you might have noticed already is that we do a lot of work here to cull the amount of information on the screen. So the first cull is a zoom cull. So when you're zoomed out, all of those dots, text dots they're called in Rhino, disappear. And as you zoom in, more information comes into view. This is all user configurable. And the second thing you might notice is that we actually selectively cull for density. So if there's too many points on screen as there are now, you can see this point here and this point here don't actually have a dot height, but if we zoom in, those dots come into view. So this is all user configurable. If you want less information on your screen, just increase the aggressiveness of that cull as well. So this is where that idea of key nodes comes into play, right? So if we're like, okay, I want this node to be a key node, and I want to grade between that and everything else. So we can just make that a key node, and everything grades between this node and that node and this node and this node. This is how you handle greater complexity in your brake lines. Additionally, we can promote other things, like if we wanted to make this a pad, we can promote that to a pad. And as is a lot of the case, if we want to create a organic path, we can go promote path and then promote that spline curve to a organic path here. And if we want that path to be 1 in 40, we can just hit it into there. And you can see we have a graded 1 in 40 organic path that conforms to our terrain. So that's how you add your own terrain objects to the document, but a lot of the time you'll probably be working with a survey. You'll generally get points or contours or a mesh as a survey, and LandArchGrade can promote any of those to an existing terrain. So to demonstrate, you're just going to have to pretend here that this is a survey. So we have points in Rhino that we want to tell LandArchGrade these are our existing terrain. So all we have to do is select them, go over to the promote button and go and click existing terrain. So this does a few things, and this is where a lot of people I find get confused. So your existing terrain has now been created, and it's this object here. This is an object that cannot be changed. It's basically a reference that the analysis tab uses in the future to determine where you're doing your cut and your fill and your landscape. If you ever want to change your existing terrain, you have to completely replace it. So to do that, you go over here to this little recycle button, click on it, and it will give you a warning that you're going to be deleting your terrain and you want to replace it. What also happens is that those existing points get promoted to LandArchGrade terrain objects. So these get lumped into the source of existing. Doesn't mean that they are existing, it just means that the source of them is from the existing model. So what's really cool now is that because we have a reference to the existing terrain, if we go into the analysis tab, we have a balance. So the idea here is that generally you want to keep your cut and fill fairly balanced so that you're not having to truck out a load of fill or cut. So if we move this down, you can see we've now got a big cut. You can see that we're going to have to bring in 73 trucks. It's not ideal, so the idea here is that you want to bring your cut and your fill to be fairly equal. We can't do that at the moment because we don't have enough points in the document, but if we sort of toggle this around, you can see that it reflects live the cut and fill so that you can try and get that balance correct. So the last major feature of LandArchGrade is material regions. So it's very handy being able to grade your terrain in real time, but this terrain is one monolithic thing, right? And your landscape generally isn't a single material. So what we need is a way to divide up that monolithic terrain into material regions. This could be for your IFC export, for rendering, etc. It's just a way to non-destructively segment this terrain into areas. So to do that, it's really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to go into plan view, and we're just going to add, just as an example, we're going to add some organic shapes. We're going to add some squares. Obviously this is not a design, but it's to give you an idea of the workflow. Now, we have these closed shapes and we want to promote them to different material regions. What we can do is go to the plus icon on this box here, go plus. What that is going to do is it's going to automatically turn on the material regions preview. So you can tell when it's on because this becomes a little bit pink. We can turn it back off and you go back into the default grading view. But when we have it on, we have all the materials available to us. So what we can do is we can say we want this to be turf, and you can see on our mesh that this becomes turf. Now, This is referencing this closed curve here, and it doesn't matter where it is in the Z, it always gets projected onto the mesh itself. And you can see when we move it around, the turf gets moved around as well. Where this gets interesting is how it interacts as a stack. So if we add another material, and this time it's going to be gravel, you can see that this material of gravel is actually on top of this turf. And that's nothing to do with the position this curve is in the Z space. What matters is the stack of these materials in the material region. So this is your stack. If we move this down or up, you can see it live updates in the viewport that you have this bullying effect. So this can be stacked as many times as you want. If we add another one, we can put some water in. You can see this is stacked above, and then when we drag it below, it stacks underneath. So this is a very quick way to non-destructively segment your terrain. So this is a good point to sort of start talking about the export functions. Once you've got your terrain all set up and beautiful and designed, you may want to start rendering your terrain or sending it to your BIM application or into AutoCAD or to Vectorworks. So we handle all of those situations. The export button is up in the top right. You can click on that. And you have three options: DXF, IFC, and Bake. So Bake basically just bakes the model into your Rhino document. So if we click Bake, you'll get a bunch of options that you can modify if you want to, but we're just going to export to Rhino. And we can see here that if we turn off our preview, that we have the points added to the document. We've got our curves of the contours added to the document. And because we added those material regions, we have these meshes automatically segmented into the document as well. If we go into layers, you can see they're all nicely added to the document into their own layers as well. So let's go back. So the next option is DXF. If we export to DXF, I'll add a few different objects just to show you how that looks like in export, because we do some pretty nice things. This is a very big terrain, but we do a few nice things with the DXF. So DXF is a 2D only export. And what this means is that I do a lot of work when we export to intelligently create the contours, to create the tagging and the way we represent certain objects in the terrain. So the idea here is if you want to take your terrain surface into a documentation software like Vectorworks or AutoCAD, this is the best route for you. So if we click DXF, we get a bunch of user options. I've made the standard ones pretty good, but feel free to change them. So if we export to DXF, we can go test, export, go save. And just opening that DXF, we have our material regions just hatched in default hatches. This is just intended basically for you to replace when you bring it into your software. We do some really nice things with the auto labeling. So each corner gets its spot height placed on, and obviously we add some additional flavor to things like ramps to show you the direction of grade. Your material regions are brought in with their own hatches, as well as the contours as well. So back in export, IFC is the way you want to go to export a 3D model with all of that data integrated into the 3D export. So that's everything you need to know to get started with LandArchGrade. We have an active community in our Discord, and I'm always available to answer any questions, as well as if you've got any feedback. I'm very open to making changes and making this one of the best grading tools in the industry. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you online.